Listen closely. The cold keeps secrets. Vardrheim had forgotten the shape of spring. Snow stacked like bone upon bone. Roofs snapped under the weight. Nets froze in the fjord before hands could pull them in. Children learned to count by the cracks that ran across the ice. Fires burned low and mean, and still the wind found throats and made them quiet. The sun rose like a bruise and never healed. In the high hall, the young prince stood and watched his people shrink around the edges. Erik, barely a man, already a ledger of losses. Frost bit through fur and found the ache beneath his ribs where worry slept. He walked the aisles between the benches, past empty bowls, past eyes that would not ask but could not stop asking. He kept his hands open. It did not help. The priests tried to dress the weather in words. Odin's displeasure, they said. A vow broken by your father, they said. The old king had sworn steel and oath in a year of hunger, and then taken back what he had promised when the harvest fattened. The sky remembered what men forgot. Now it collected. Erik did not argue. He had learned that belief survives on less food than a body. He gave the last of the smoked fish to a woman too proud to take it. He set his own portion in a child's hands. He looked at the altar and felt nothing answer. Night came early. It came with teeth. Sleep would not come, and so he went where men go when rooms run out of air, out. The guards tried to follow. He told them to wait. Command is a knife. Sometimes you must use the sharp end on yourself. He took the path behind the granaries where the drifts lay like fallen walls, then the deer trail that knew how to move under pines without sound. Past the boundary stone the world changed. Old trees closed ranks. The air tasted of iron and stories. People called it the Forbidden Wood because names make fences. The snow there remembered footprints too clearly. The wise stepped lightly or not at all. He did not call out. He did not need to. When a man carries hunger for others in his chest, the forest hears. She was waiting where the river slowed to think. A woman wrapped in night, hair white as hoarfrost, skin pale without weakness, eyes the color of moonlit water. Eira. Exile. Which to those who need a simple word for what frightens them. She stood with her hands folded and her breath steady, as if winter had learned manners from her and not the other way around. You walk into teeth, she said, and her voice was not unkind. I walk for them, Erik answered. If the gods will not listen to priests, perhaps they will listen to the lost. The gods listen, she said. They answer when it pleases them. Pause. And when it does not. He told her what she already knew. The storerooms down to splinters, the nets brittle, the newborns quiet. He did not speak of his father. The trees spoke for him. They creaked like old guilt under snow. Eira studied him the way a blade studies a whetstone. What will you pay? She asked. Everything, he said too quickly, and the word hung white in the air. He took it back, shaped it smaller. Anything I can live without that will keep my people alive. She smiled thin. Honest. Dangerous. The river ticked under ice as if counting. Eira lifted her chin to the blind sky. There is a pact, she said. Older than banners. Older than temples. If you join yourself to me under the moon, the frost will bend. Ice will loosen its teeth. But the price returns in 9 nights, and it returns with interest. He did not ask what the price was. He had learned that some answers break men before the cost is due. I don't make this choice for faith, he said. I make it for them. That is the only kind of faith that works, she said quietly. He hesitated long enough to prove he still remembered fear. Then he nodded. Tell me how. They walked deeper, where the snow held its breath and the pines became pillars of a church no hand had built. Eira drew a circle with ash and salt and a lock of hair she would not name. She cut her palm. He did the same. Their blood fell and made a shape that did not belong to either of them alone. She spoke words that tasted like iron and salt in memory. The air changed direction. The wind came from beneath the earth and carried the smell of thaw. Look up, she said. He did. The sky opened with green fire, the aurora bending like a god's unreadable smile. The light moved over their faces, over the snow, over the black river beginning to show its pulse again. Eira stepped close. The moon watched without blinking. They joined, forehead to forehead, breath to breath, yes spoken against yes. Not romance. Not convenience. A binding of weather and will. When it was done, the wood exhaled. Somewhere, a branch cracked like a broken rule. Far off, the fjord groaned and shifted as if remembering how to move. Erik felt the change first in his teeth, the old ache easing, the way a room feels when someone opens a window. He did not weep. Not yet. He stood and let the knowledge arrive. He had chosen a road no priest could bless, and it was working. Eira's face in the green light was not mercy and not malice. It was a ledger. 9 nights, she said. 9, and then the debt comes on its own feet. What does it take? He asked. Say it and I will pay it now. She shook her head. The price is not a coin. It is a door. You will know it when it opens. They walked back to the edge where the forest decides what it will allow the world to see. In the valley, the river tore a thin seam through its skin. A child's cry rose, surprised, joyful, disbelieving. Fires leaped higher without more wood. Men climbed roofs and pulled snow down laughing like boys. Women who had forgotten what hope felt like remembered. Erik looked at Eira and tried to fit both gratitude and terror in one breath. If this saves them, he said, let it take me. It already has, she murmured. He stepped from the trees. He did not turn to see whether she followed. He knew she would be where the pact said she must be, and that was near and far at once. The priests would curse. The council would count. The people would warm their hands and forget to ask what kind of fire they were using. He accepted all of it. That night, under the aurora's slow river, they kept the marriage quiet and true. No witnesses but the pines and the old cold learning how to leave. Eira's hand in his. The circle closed. The vow sealed. Somewhere below, the ice split and sighed like a beast letting go. Somewhere above, ravens turned once and vanished into color. The gods heard your plea, Prince, Eira said, voice a thread in the green. But not all miracles come from the light. Spring did not arrive gently. It came like a long-held breath released in one shiver. Snow slid from roofs with a sound like relief. The river remembered its name and ran for the sea. Fields, once brittle and pale, pushed up green like a promise paid in full. Women unlatched windows. Men unbarred doors. Children laughed at puddles as if they were small miracles, and in Vardrheim they were. The priests who had shaken ash onto heads now shook bells from the steeple. They pointed at the sky and called the sun a sign. They called Erik something larger than a prince. The God's chosen. The one who broke winter's spine. Crowns sit lighter when praise holds them up. But names have edges. The other name traveled colder. Eira. Not queen. Not wife. Which? She walked the ramparts in a dark cloak, hair like the inside of frost, eyes a color you couldn't keep in your hand. People lowered theirs. They said she spoke to ravens and the birds answered. They said her shadow kept different time. They said her touch stole dreams and returned them wrong. They said a lot. Fear loves to be busy. Erik listened and did not let the words choose his mouth. He watched her in the hours without court, dawn in the east tower, dusk by the western birches, alone, always alone, as if solitude were the only room large enough for what she carried. When he approached, she did not retreat. She simply turned and made space beside her in the wind. At the well one afternoon, a woman pressed bread into Eira's hands and then, thinking herself brave, snatched her fingers back as if the loaf might wake cursed. Eira thanked her anyway, the way a hill thanks snow by letting it rest. Erik saw the woman's face, pride strangled by superstition, and something inside him took a side. He found Eira later behind the stables where the wind couldn't steal every word. They call you witch, he said softly, a statement that apologized for itself. She tilted her head. And you? A test. A wound offered on purpose. I call you hope, he answered and let it stand. Her mouth did not move at first. Then it did, in something that was not a smile so much as the idea of one. Hope is a heavy thing, she said. Then let me carry what I can. He meant it, and she knew. So she let him see the small domestic truths no prophecy bothers to mention, how she warmed her hands over the forge because ordinary fire still loved her palms, how she fed the night birds liver and sweet wine so they would keep their counsel, how she slept badly because the old cold had learned the bed's path and came sometimes to stand at the foot like a guest who wouldn't leave. In the showing, tenderness grew, not a flower too fragile for this place, but a fir rooted deep, bending and surviving. They did not parade their marriage. They let it belong to rooms with low ceilings and to the pauses between orders. He learned the cadence of her silence. She learned the shape of his breath when he pretended not to be afraid. He touched her wrist once in the storeroom where herbs hung like sleeping birds and she did not pull away. It felt like spring learning the name of his skin. The priests tried to turn gratitude into dogma. They failed. The people preferred bread. Harvests doubled where last season there had been none. Nets came up singing silver. Hens laid more eggs than hands could count before heat cooled them. Praise piled at Erik's feet until it felt like a second winter, easier to die under than to dig out from. He nodded and deflected. He pointed toward the fields, toward the river, toward the sky. He did not point toward Eira because he had already watched the way a crowd can change shape when it is asked to love what it fears. Still, fear found its angles. Lads swore that at dusk the ravens lined the ridge, dozens, then hundreds, black punctuation across the horizon. Old women swore they heard whispering where no one stood. A shepherd returned from the north meadow shaking. He said the lake's ice, what little remained of it, had bled. Erik went to look. The water wore a stain near the reeds, iron red, thin as a bruise but spreading with a patience that did not belong to any weather. Algae, a healer said, eager to be useful. Rust washed from the hills, offered another. The words felt like blankets spread over a body that had already gone cold. Eira knelt by the shore, fingers barely skimming the surface. The stain curled toward her hand like ink deciding to spell a letter. She withdrew, face unreadable. The world pays its debts strangely, she murmured. That night a raven landed on the sill above their bed and cocked its head as if the dark had told a joke only birds understand. Eira stood barefoot on the planks and looked at it. The raven looked back, then dropped a small object on the sill, a pebble white as bone, carved with a line and a hook and a ring. Erik knew enough runes now to feel the cold behind it even if he could not name it. He closed his hand over the token and did not let his knuckles shake where Eira could see. The next morning the castle woke to a ring of black on stone. Ravens on the battlements. Ravens on the gatehouse. Ravens on the chapel cross, staring at the bell until even the metal felt watched. Courtiers crossed themselves with little gestures they thought invisible. Children laughed at first, then stopped. The cook strewed salt. The priest swung incense and tried to smoke the air into something more compliant. The birds only blinked, patient as death. Erik found Eira in the east light. He reached for candor because anything less would rot. They are afraid, he said. They should be, she replied not cruelly. Simply true. Of you? Of the cost, she said. Then, after a heartbeat, of me as its messenger. He wanted to promise her safety the way men promise whether to wives and children. He didn't. He touched her forehead with his old ritual turned personal. If they turn on you, he whispered, they turn on the hand that opened the door for their spring. If they turn, she said, turn with them or away. But do not let them tear you in half. I won't be whole without you. That, she said, and the not smile came back, is the danger. The day grew long and strange. The lake wore its red more boldly. The ravens did not tire. Whispers went from linen rooms to guard towers and returned fatter. Eira walked the wall and the birds hopped aside to make her path like citizens yielding the street to a sovereign they did not choose. Erik walked the town and handed apples to boys and firewood to widows, and everywhere he went gratitude followed like a dog that loves you more than it should. Love does not cancel fear. It sits beside it at the table and eats quietly. At sunset, between the last bell and the first star, Erik stood on the roof above the high hall and watched the day bleed down the fjord. Eira joined him without sound. The sky took their silhouettes and stretched them long across the slates. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Will it take what I cannot give? It will take what's willing to come when called." Pause. That is the shape of all magic anyone ever trusted. He looked at the village, smoke, stew, laughter, a fiddle brave enough to try a tune. He looked at her, shadow on shadow, eyes holding light as if it might change its mind and leave. He said the only thing that steadied him. "We will pay it together." "Then it will cost more," she said, and touched his cheek as if memorizing it for a winter that hadn't yet learned how to arrive. Night rose. The birds lifted as one, a black wave moving through the violet. The lake kept its wound. In the streets, a girl woke screaming from a dream she couldn't remember. In the stables, a mare refused grain and stared at nothing. In the chapel, the priest forgot the last line of a prayer and didn't know why his mouth had become a stranger. The people slept, full and warm for the first time in years. They slept under a sky that had returned to them like a father finally learning the way home. And as they slept, the narrator, call it the wind, call it the old gods, call it the conscience of stones, told the only story that tells itself right. For every life saved, a price was drawing near, unseen but inevitable. How long can a secret sit beside a fire before it starts to smoke? By the 7th night, whispers had learned the hallways. By the 8th, they knew the way to the bedchamber door. On the 9th evening, the elder asked for the prince. Old Jalti, bones like dry sticks, eyes like storms seen from far out at sea. He had carried the laws of the clan in his head so long they had worn grooves there. He stood in the longhouse with the winter staff in both hands and spoke as if the timbers themselves had demanded it. "A pact with a witch is a nail through the sky," he said. "It breaks law older than our fathers' fathers. The gods allow such nails only once. Then they bend the world to pull them out." He lifted his chin toward Erik. "The price is always the same. The soul of the first who loves her." Silence. Big, hurt silence. The hearth crackled like a sneer. Erik felt the words move through him the way cold moves through a wound. He did not pretend not to understand. He stared at the floor until the board steadied, then he said, carefully as if speaking over thin ice, "Who wrote this law?" "The ones who had to live with it," Jalti answered. "The law is not for the gods. It is for us who bruise under them. And if the one who loves her chooses not to be taken?" Jalti's mouth softened with pity that did not help. "Choice does not cancel gravity." The priests crossed themselves with smoke and scripture. The father of the temple, robed in seal white, stepped forward with the calm of a man who has never had to pick between love and law. "Bring her," he said. "We will end the curse with heat and iron and words that close doors." Erik kept his voice low. "There is no curse. There is debt," the father replied. "And debt collected looks like curse to those who owe." Night pounded against the shutters. The ravens did not come. That scared them more. Eira had already felt the shift in the air. You don't live long in exile without learning the weather's other languages. She packed nothing. She walked the servants' stair with steps that refused to hurry. At the lower yard gate the guards stood like questions. One answered badly. He reached, she slipped past with a gentleness that shamed him more than any blow. The second was quicker. Hands. Rope. The old fear of a crowd learning it can be brave if it's cruel together. They brought her to the small chamber behind the chapel. Not a dungeon, those are honest. This room wore mercy like perfume. Candles. A chair. A bowl of water. The father sat opposite, face careful, mouth already forming forgiveness for the words he planned to force from her. Erik entered without asking permission. He didn't take the chair they offered. He stood where the door could see him. His coat smelled of snow and of horses ridden too hard. He looked at Eira and let his face say what a crown would never let his mouth say. Question, the father said mildly. Then absolution. Then ending. Eira met his eye. She did not ask for rescue. She had learned not to hang hope on other people's hooks. Ask, she said. Did you break the law? The law broke itself when it let winter kill babies, she answered. Did you bind the prince to a pact? I bound myself to a door and asked it to open. Did you place a curse on Vardrheim? She took a breath. The room tasted of incense and iron. I did not curse your people, prince, she said, turning to Erik with a gaze that had no shield in it. I delayed their sentence. I bought time with my exile and your vow. The storm was already walking. I made it take smaller steps. The father smiled sadly, the way men smile when they believe logic is kindness. So you admit necessity. Then you will admit consequence. The law demands a life. And you would make it tidy by calling it mine, Eira said. Because my name is easier to burn. Because your name is the match, he snapped, and the softness broke. Erik's hand closed on the back of a chair until Wood complained. You want her death to teach the gods a lesson, he said quietly. What lesson? That we are obedient even when we are foolish? That we remember order, the father replied. Order did not bring spring, Erik said. She did. This is not about gratitude. It is, Erik said, and the words strode around the room like a soldier who knew the way to war. This is about owing what we owe. The father stood. Prince, step aside. No. Two guards moved, careful as if approaching a cliff. Eira's eyes flicked to them, then to Erik. There are moments when devotion must change its method. She looked down at her hands, bound with a courtesy rope, and then up at the ceiling where smoke traveled like a thought. You cannot save both, she said softly. Your people. Me. I can try, he said. That is the shape of all tragedies, she murmured. And some mercies. He acted before anyone could decide to forbid him. He drew the blade the guards had forgotten to check for because it wore a prince's seal instead of a killer's habit. 3 steps. One cut to Eira's bonds. A second to the guard's spear shaft. A shove that was almost a hug. The father cried out, more offended than afraid. Run, Erik breathed. Eira did not. She moved with him. Together they slipped the door and skimmed the corridor where prayers are supposed to outrun panic. Down the side stair. Across the kitchen where the stew never has enough salt and everyone thinks the queen doesn't know. Into the cold. Stone to wooden hatch half drowned by snow. The catacombs smelled of wet stone and 1,000 unspoken things. The torches there burn like secrets, low, patient, sure. Erik led her past skull niches and saint bones and old flags that had learned to be dust without losing their color. In a deep chamber where the ceiling bent like a bow, he stopped. Here, he said. For now. You will not outrun law in a tunnel, she warned. I am not outrunning law, he said. I am buying a dawn. She touched his cheek. Buying costs. I have nothing left that isn't for sale, he said. My name. My breath. My soul if it will learn a new owner. The price chooses itself, she whispered. That is its cruelty. He took her hands. They were cold. So were his. They warmed each other, not enough but honest. At first light, he said. We leave. North. The fox path through the birches. The ridge road no one keeps. We'll take the river where it runs under the hill and let it carry us until our names sound different in other mouths. She tilted her forehead against his. You cannot be prince and fugitive. Then let me be man, he said. Just once. They listened to the castle breathing above them. Boots. Voices trying not to be loud. Bells. The sound of a door closed carefully to pretend it was not a cell. Erik counted heartbeats until the numbers blurred. He forced his lungs to learn the pace of hope. Erik, Eira said into the space between them. If the law takes you, it will not take the part of you that made this choice. That part belongs to you. Keep it. Keep yourself, he answered. They said nothing more because words can crack when you stack too many. They waited. The torch burned. The stones sweated. The night stretched thin. Then the sound came. Not from the halls. From beyond the walls. Low at first. A pulse you feel in your bones before your ears wake to it. Drums. Far away but not far enough. A disciplined appetite marching in. The army of a neighbor who counts winters like opportunities. Or something older coming to collect. Eira's eyes found his in the half-light. He didn't speak the fear. He didn't have to. The drums spoke it for him. The ninth night had learned a new voice. Dawn arrived to the sound of wood-learning fear. The first strike hit the lower gate like thunder that had picked a side. Erik woke inside the catacombs to dust sifting from the ceiling and the taste of iron in the air. He reached for Eira. She was already standing, already listening, head tilted, eyes closed, every nerve a compass. Clans, she said. 2, maybe 3. Banners from the east. Wolves painted over boar. They ride with hunger and a priest's blessing. Then we go up, Erik answered, and the two of them ran the unlit passages like veins. The courtyard was a page on fire. Men on the walls dragged ladders backward. Arrows rose and fell with a sound like rain gone hard. The eastern tower coughed black smoke. Cold 8 fingers. Panic 8 order. Through the gate slit came the beat of war drums and the bitter laughter of men who'd waited years for a kingdom to be thin enough to chew. Prince, a captain shouted. We can't hold both gates. You'll hold because you must, Erik said, and it steadied them the way a hand steadies a shaking table. He turned to Eira, saw the quiet in her face the way you see a cliff downriver when you're already in the current. No, he said before the word had a target. No. They will not stop at your walls, she replied, voice low. They will take the fields. They will take the children. And the winter you bled to end will start walking again with a different name. She looked at his hands. Let me be the knife you hate. The gate bar cracked. A spear came through and tasted air. On the wall walk a horn failed to finish a note. The man who'd blown it finished nothing else. Eira stepped toward the center of the yard. The priest saw her and recoiled as if the night itself were crossing the stones. Which, someone hissed. Queen, Erik said, and it shut a few mouths long enough to matter. Eira lifted both palms and wrote a circle in nothing. The air changed temperature. The ravens came, not as omens but as witnesses, black commas on parapet and cross. She spoke. The words were old enough to have worn grooves in the world. The clouds above the keep clenched, then tore, a seam ripped by an invisible hand. Light bled through, red at first, then white so fierce it made men stagger. Fire rolled out in sheets, but it did not touch the thatch or the banners or the men who wore Vardrheim's sigil. It fell beyond the walls, a ring of sky turned to blade. The enemy line broke the way frost breaks under a boot. Horses reared, eyes rolled, riders thrown like bad thoughts. Shields clattered. Men who had left home certain now learned a new grammar for fear. The ground outside the moat flashed and steamed as if summer had risen through it in one breath. Screams changed key from hungry to holy. On the wall, the captain crossed himself and then forgot which god the gesture belonged to. By all the... Hold, Erik snapped, and the men held because they needed orders more than they needed theology. Eira kept speaking. Her lips bled first. Then her nose. Then thinly her ears. Power passed through her like lightning through a tree that doesn't care about survival. Her hair lifted. Her shadow split. Above, fire braided itself into a crown and set it on the morning. Eira. Erik ran to her, almost blinded by the light, boots slipping on blown ash. He grabbed her wrists, hot then horribly cold. Enough. No salvation is worth your pain. Her eyes found his. For a moment he saw not a witch, not a queen, not an exile, just a woman tallying what love costs when you pay it in a currency no one invented. Pain is not the measure, she whispered. Outcome is. Beyond the wall the ring of flame collapsed inward with a sigh that sounded like an ocean retreating. Where men had stood, smoke learned new shapes. The ladders fell back. The drums forgot their hands. The clans fled enough to call it strategy later. Banners dropped into mud the color of old fruit. The east went quiet in a way the east had not been quiet in a decade. The light closed. The sky stitched itself. Everything that had not been burning remembered how a morning should smell. And Eira folded. Erik caught her as if the ground had turned traitor. Her weight surprised him. Power had made her seem lighter than law. He sank to his knees, garments wet with melted frost. Around them, the courtyard tried to remember cheering and could not yet manage it. "Stay," he said, because people say foolish things to keep their mouths from breaking. "Stay with me." Her breath came thin, then thinned. Blood slid from the corner of her mouth and fell to the snow, 3 small drops, then a 4th, then more. Where it landed, it did not sink. It blossomed. Lines ran together, found each other as if they'd been waiting. A hooked stave. 2 crossing lines. A ring. The rune of death stared up from the white like an eye that had finally chosen to open. The priest saw it first. They always see symbols before they see people. "She has fulfilled the pact," the father murmured, awe and terror married in his throat. "The gods will claim their due. They will claim the groom." Murmurs moved across the yard like wind across wheat. The groom. The chosen. The one who loved the witch. Eyes slid to Erik as if his soul had already begun to walk toward the debt collector. "No," he said, standing with Eira in his arms. Snow clung to her hair like a crown that had learned pity too late. He turned on the father, on the elders, on the men who wanted this to be simple because simple spares effort. "No. The law," Jalti began. "Changed," Erik cut. "Because we did." "The price does not," said the father, softer now, almost kindly, which made it worse. "You married the fire that ended winter. You share its ash." Erik looked at the rune at his boots. He looked at the faces that had learned to be warm again and now remembered how to be cold. He looked at Eira, skin gone gray at the edges, pulse counting with the patience of a dwindling candle. The world tilted toward inevitability. He set her down gently on fur someone thrust beneath, anger clenching like a new fist. "Listen," he said, and his voice went out across the courtyard and climbed the walls and made the ravens blink. "I will not feed the gods my heart because they are hungry. I will not teach my people that gratitude is a throat you learn to cut. I will not let law call itself destiny just because it likes the costume." "Prince," the captain warned as if blasphemy were a blade that could turn. "Let them come," Erik said, not to the captain. To the sky. "Let them come with their ravens and their storms and their old rules stamped on new iron. I will meet them on the 9th night or the 9,000. I will stand on the ridge and name them to their faces." He touched Eira's brow, wet with cold and sweat. Her eyes fluttered at the sound of him and stayed closed, as if the world outside her skin had grown too bright to risk. He lowered his forehead to hers and made a vow in a voice that did not ask permission. "I swear it. I swear by the thaw we bought and the bread these hands will still place in empty bowls. I swear by my mother's bones and my father's broken oath. I swear by the people who have learned again how to sleep. I will defy any god who comes to claim what is mine. If the price demands my soul, it will have to take it from a man who refuses to kneel." The courtyard held that oath like a new heat. The priest stepped back because something older than they were had just arrived and it did not smell like incense. Far off, thunder answered with a sound that could have been agreement or warning. Above, the sun finally cleared the eastern ridge and laid a thin gold blade across Eira's face. Erik lifted his head, jaw set, eyes the color of storm water when it chooses a shore. He looked past the banners, past the soot, past the rune cooling in the snow. He looked at the horizon and found a war there that had nothing to do with men. "So hear me," he said, to the wind, to the watching birds, to the gods if they had the nerve to listen. "I am done being chosen. I choose." And the morning, which had been trying to be ordinary, shivered in its skin and learned a new name for what would come next. Count days by the way silence stacks. First night, the world still trembles from what almost ended it. Second, the ravens forget to come. Third, bread tastes like a promise you can chew. Fourth, laughter learns how to walk indoors again. Fifth, the priest speaks softer, as if not to wake something sleeping under the floor. Sixth, the river sings at the right speed. Seventh, the snow gives up its last corners in thin, reluctant sighs. Eighth, the sky looks ordinary on purpose. Then the ninth night comes. And the wind remembers its real name. They had run to a cabin the map pretended not to know. Birch walls. Moss-stuffed chinks. A roof that creaked like an old hand closing and opening. Erik lit the hearth the way a man lights hope, with care and fire he would rather spend on anything else. Eira brewed broth with bones and juniper and the kind of patience that turns water into a home. They slept in a bed that did not know crowns. They spoke in voices meant for kitchens, not halls. It was almost enough to make them believe they could be ordinary. Listen, she said sometimes, head on his chest. Only the owls. He listened. Owls. A fox's careful feet. The river shushing secrets. No drums. No crowds. No bells. The world small and good and undeserved. He held her with the gratitude of a man who has paid the wrong debt for so long he no longer remembers the price for joy. He kissed the place on her temple where the fever had burned itself out and left only the memory of heat. He counted the breath between her words like a miser counts coins he will never spend. He did not open the window at night. He did not look at the moon. But the moon does not need permission to find you. On the ninth night, the wind changed direction without asking and slid its cold knife under the door. The fire lowered itself without being told. The shadows in the rafters grew long shins and stood up. Eira turned her face toward the window before the light changed. She felt it on her skin the way a lake feels a thrown stone before the surface breaks. Erik, she said, the syllables too steady, which is another kind of tremble. I know, he answered without yet knowing. His hand found her hand and tightened. Bones remembered oaths. Blood remembered doors. The room thinned. Moonlight fell across the floor in a blade. It did not glow, it insisted. It climbed his boots, his legs, his ribs, his throat, stopping just below the mouth that had learned how to say yes to impossible things. In the window's reflection, a shape gathered where dark should be. Not a man. Not an animal. A height that had learned to be a story. One eye. Hungry and sure. Ravens feathering the edges of absence. Don't move, Eira breathed as if stillness could teach a tide manners. The shadow did not enter. It did not need to. When a god decides to be present, distance becomes polite fiction. The voice came like wind speaking through rock. The oath was broken, it said. Not accusation. Accounting. The price is your soul, Prince. Erik let the title slide past him as if it belonged to someone who still believed a crown could help. He stepped once, placing himself between Eira and the window, which is what human love does against the unreasonable. He dipped his head, not in worship, not in challenge, but because even defiance knows how to be courteous when it matters. My soul, he said. Not hers. Eira moved to his side, fingers catching his sleeve. Take mine, she said, and it was not plea, it was instruction. Take the pact bearer. Take the blood that called the thaw. Take the hands that drew the circle. He owes nothing you cannot claim from me. Silence learned to lean. Snow pressed its ear to the door. The shadow did not blink. You do not pay for being the knife, it said. He pays for being the hand that chose it. That is not law, she hissed. That is indulgence. That is the part of law men call fate when they dislike its shape. Erik squeezed her hand once before letting go, the way a rider squeezes a horse's neck before opening the gate. He turned his face toward the window. If you take me, he said, take what brought me here. Take my love with the rest so I do not lose it twice. Eira spun him to her, hard enough to stop words from organizing. Do not speak like a door, she said. Speak like a wall. I have been a wall all winter, he said, and the smile came like a crack in ice. Let me be an open thing once and honest. She kissed him. Not the kind that writes an ending. The kind that reopens every beginning you've ever dared to want. Smoke and salt and the steadiness of someone who will carry you even as you vanish. Her hands on his jaw, not shaking. His fingers in her hair, memorizing strands like scripture. The wind paused. Even gods know when to wait. "Remember this?" he said against her mouth. "I remember you," she answered. He turned back to the window and nodded to the shape that had come to collect what men call the uncollectible. "I am ready." The cabin changed shade. Not brighter. More absolute. The moonlight gathered like a net and threw itself. It struck his chest without touching him. It lifted him without lifting him. For a heartbeat he was a man in a room, and then he was a man in a river of white, and then he was a name learning how to live without a mouth. Eira reached. Her fingers closed on light as if it were cloth. It slipped. She stepped into the blade and felt it pass through her without cruelty. She said a word that had never been spoken in any chapel and should have been. The air refused to carry it. The shadow watched her for the length of one human sorrow and did not move. Erik looked at her without eyes. She felt it. That is how love works when flesh is not available. He did not say goodbye. He did not say forgive me. He did not say wait. He said the only true sentence left to him, and it did not need sound. You were worth the winter. The light closed with him in it. The room exhaled the way a grave exhales when you take your hand off the lid. The hearth coughed once and remembered how to burn small. The bed remembered how to be empty. The window remembered how to be glass instead of gate. Eira stood very straight and very still because collapse is a luxury reserved for those who are not being watched by gods. The shadow remained a moment longer, then folded back into the world seem as if it had merely checked a ledger and found it balanced. Outside, the forest practiced quiet. Owls turned their heads and did not call. The river slowed. Somewhere deep under the snow, a fox put her nose to the wind and decided morning would have to do. Eira knelt where the light had held him. The planks were cool, and when her palms pressed down they came away wet, not with tears not yet, but with a thin silver frost that smelled like apples and iron. She pressed her forehead to the floor and allowed herself one sound. It was not a word. It was not a song. It was the kind of noise grief makes when it refuses to be domesticated. The cabin listened. The forest kept the secret. And at the edge of the clearing, the moon put one pale hand on the birches and did not apologize. The ninth night had taken what it came for. The silence that followed was the kind that makes even gods uncomfortable. Days after, the hall forgot how to echo. The throne sat like a question no one dared shape. Priests draped it in white and called the absence holy. They rang bells until the metal went dull. They told the people the prince had ascended on a road of moonlight, chosen and cherished, a hero received with feast and song. The crowd wanted to believe. Belief is cheaper than hunger. They laid spruce boughs on the steps and whispered thanks to a sky that had not answered them in years. But Eira did not kneel. She stood in the doorway where he had once stood and felt the hollow of the room try to swallow her name. Ascended? No. Taken. She could still taste the cold where he'd vanished, a bright, clean bite on the tongue. She slept without sleeping, face turned toward the window, listening for footsteps that would never be boots again. She did not wear black. Morning presumes an ending. This was not that. She wore the same dark cloak, the same braid cutting her hair into a line the wind respected. She walked the courtyards where people practiced joy, and she did not begrudge them the practice. Bread was real now. Children ran without counting the steps. Dogs slept without growling in their dreams. Let them have this. It had been bought, and the receipt was written in her bones. At night she went where the map thins and the world changes its mind. Ridge to ridge. Shore to shore. She learned the voices of storms until one sounded like him. Not words. The shape of him. The cadence of a man who had taught himself to be gentle in a place that expected hardness. She stood on cliffs and let snow needle her cheeks, and let that not be punishment. She answered the wind out loud because silence is an argument you always lose. "Where did they take you?" she asked the trees. The trees gave her their old answer: down. The priest tried to console her with stories. In the old songs, the chosen sit at long tables, iron light on their faces, laughter like weapons laid aside. They drink. They boast. They wait for the end of everything as if it were a hunt they'd been promised. Eira nodded to be civil. Inside, something shook its head until the motion became a vow. On the seventh day, when the cold had learned her routines, the vision came. Not a dream. Dreams are thin and forget themselves by noon. This arrived with weight. She was standing by the lake that had bled and then forgotten how when the water went still as hammered metal. The sky bent. The color drained. A seam opened where light should be. She saw a field that did not belong to any map. Not meadow. Not snow. Ground like glass but breathed. Above it, no sky, only a ceiling of gray that moved like thought. In the center, a man knelt. Hands bound behind him with a rope that had no fibers. A chain made of sentence, not iron. Erik. Younger and older at once. His head bowed. His mouth set against begging. Around him, shadows watched, polite as judges. He lifted his face. Eyes the color of storm water remembering sunlight. He did not see her, but he felt the attention of a world that loved him. He straightened. The chain tightened, not cruel, simply correct, as if a ledger had reminded him of its columns. A promise, the place seemed to say. He is held by the shape of his own word. Eira reached, not with hands, with the part of herself that had once taught the sky to open. Her palm met cold that was not temperature. Law pressed flat. Debt given a body. She pushed. It did not move. She looked for doors. The field had none. Then another voice, lower than thunder and inside the bone. There is a way, but it is under. She woke with her nails in her palms and the smell of river stones in her nose. She did not tell the priest. She did not tell the elders. Some maps cannot survive being spoken aloud. She went to the library no one used and turned pages no one read because prayers had always been cheaper. She found the old word with mildew in its teeth, Helviger, the road beneath roads. A passage under ice where souls move like smoke when the world remembers how to collect them. A crossing at the edge of the sea where mist sits like a guard who doesn't look up unless you say the wrong name. Under, she said to the empty shelves. Then under I go. She returned to the hall once more. The throne stared past her, hungry for a weight it could boast about. She touched its arm just once. Not blessing. Farewell. In the courtyard a boy was teaching a dog to sit with more patience than the priests taught faith. She put a hand on the dog's head. It leaned into her as if knowing she was about to step somewhere no animal follows. She went to the cliff where the wind speaks in full sentences. She called his name and let the syllables find the places they wanted to rest. The air answered with a wordless ache. Good. Ache is proof. Night came early on purpose. She packed what could be carried by a woman who expects not to return. A coil of rope. A kettle. Birch bark for fire that stutters. A knife that had learned not to boast. She left behind every object that would try to own her if she died wearing it. She chose the path no one maintains. Down through dwarf pines patient as old women. Across a yard of stone that remembered giants. Past cairns that had been hands, then rocks, then hands again. At the headland the sea had gone still in the old grip. Ice to the horizon. The moon laid a pale road across it, too thin for a cart, strong enough for faith. She remembered the first oath, the circle, the aurora, the kiss that had not learned to be goodbye. She remembered the rune in snow. She remembered his last sentence in the cabin that had tried to be ordinary. You were worth the winter. She put that in the center of herself and let everything else orbit it. Listen, she told the sea. I am coming under. I will not knock. Open or be broken. Mist rose to meet her, gray with the weight of voices that had no bodies left. It did not welcome. It did not refuse. It simply existed with the authority of old water. She stepped onto the ice. It held. She walked. The sound of her steps went out and came back changed, as if the world beneath the world were already rehearsing her name. Behind her, the hall lit lamps. Bells searched for evening with careful hands. The people told their children a story about a prince who had become a star and a winter that had finally learned manners. Before her, the horizon erased itself and then dared her to find it again. Eira did not look back. She let the mist take her shape and unmake it, and when the sea exhaled, she went with it, forward, downward, into the underroad where law is a hallway and love is a knife you keep hidden until the last door. Years taught the kingdom a new calendar. They no longer counted winters by hunger but by songs. Children learned dates by verses, not by ice. In market squares and smoky halls and at the edges of fields growing old with grain, the bards tuned their strings and breathed the first line that always drew a crowd. On the 9th night, a prince walked into the moonlight and did not cast a shadow. They called him many names: Erik the Chosen, Erik the Vanished, Erik who paid, because a country will rename its grief until it fits in the mouth. They had a second song too. Softer, stranger. About the woman who refused to mourn like the world asked and instead learned the road beneath the roads. Eira of the mist, they sang. Eira who walked between worlds. Mothers hummed it while braiding daughters' hair, the way safety hums its hopes. Hunters whistled it at the fjord's edge when fog came in on bare feet. Priests frowned and then let the tune pass because even doctrine must sleep and music is where it does. Time in Vardrheim became generous. The river ran with a pace you could plan around. Nets came up heavy. Bread rose. On feast days they set a place at the high table for the prince who was gone and the queen who had stepped into mist. They filled the cups and did not drink them as if hospitality could reach across more than miles. Children crept between benches to peek at the untouched bread and the wine that caught candlelight and held it like a gentle secret. A few small hands stole crumbs when no one watched. No thunder answered. The people began cautiously to trust the quiet. The priests revised the story in sermons as priests will. They spoke of a noble surrender. Of gods who take not in anger but in arithmetic. Of a debt settled in light, which is such a lovely phrase it almost makes theft sound like a blessing. Yet, in the long nights when frost drew lace on the window panes, even the holy listened for something older than their books and found it. On certain winds, a presence. In certain silences, an answer. Sailors told the best of it. In the black mouth of a gale, when the mast bowed like a prayer and ropes turned to snakes, they swore they heard two voices braided through the noise, one calling from above the waterline, one answering from deep below. Not words. Names learning to be bridges. The storm would stutter like a drunk remembering manners and then let the ship go. Men came home with hands that shook and wives who learned to hold them without questions. Voices, they said. A prince and a queen and something that respects them. Old Jalti, the clan elder whose eyes had seen too many winters survive themselves, lived long enough to temper his law with mercy. The gods write rules, he told his great-grandson one evening, and love writes exceptions. In my youth I would have burned the exception to keep the rule warm. Now I think I would rather shiver honestly. The boy, who knew the songs by heart, nodded in the grave way children do when they recognize truth wearing no costume. And yet the tale never sat still. As with all stories that insist on living, it changed its clothes with the season. In the north hamlets they said Eira crossed the ice under a sky that would not blink and bargained with a queen older than stones. In the river towns they claimed she found a door in the current and walked into its throat singing the names of the lost until the water coughed one back. In the city, where markets turned miracles into currency, they sold charms carved with a hook, a cross-stroke and a ring. If you wore it at night and dreamed of a road that sloped down, the seller promised, the prince would meet you at the bend and teach your fear to speak politely. None of those trinkets held real power, but belief is its own kind of energy. It warmed palms. It tied threads. It slowed tears. And sometimes it brought people to the cliff at dusk, the one above the fjord where the wind tells only the truth, and there, if the sky was hunting for company and the sea remembered how to listen, you could nearly hear it. A call, a reply, a patience that refused to rot. Years put silver in beards and softness in the knees of men who once measured themselves with spears. The throne did what thrones do when untended. It became a symbol, then a chair, then a rumor about what is owed and who owes it. Councils rose and fell. Borders sighed and remembered they were lines made by hands. The harvest blessed and betrayed in equal measure. Children asked where heroes go when their work is done. Mothers told them they go where they can still help. Fathers pointed at the ridge where the aurora sometimes came in summer and said nothing at all, which is a way of telling the whole truth without breaking it. Then one winter that behaved itself almost the entire season, a shepherd girl vanished for a day and returned with frost on her lashes and a story too big for her chest. She had followed a lamb toward the river mouth and lost the path in a fog that smelled like spent apples and iron. The world went quiet the wrong way. The ice under her boots remembered how to be door and whispered. She did not fall, she was invited. For a heartbeat, no, for two, she stood in a gray field where the air tasted like coin and sorrow, and a man not much older than the song said her name in a voice like a hand held out across a table. Behind him, a woman with hair the color of winter's first breath smiled like someone memorizing a face for the second time. The girl closed her eyes. When she opened them, the field was gone, and a gull was laughing as if it had solved a riddle. She arrived home at dusk and told her grandfather, who told the bard, who told the town, which decided, to its credit, not to call her a liar. Whether the tale was true didn't matter as much as what it did. Men stood easier at the cliff's edge. Women who had locked grief in the pantry let it eat at the table sometimes. The priests learned a new prayer that began not with law but with thanks. And the bards adjusted their last verse so the song could end without closing. Listen. In the storms that come on us from the north, when the sky lowers its brow and the sea bares its teeth, listen past the fear and the rope burn and the captain's orders. You will hear two voices. One calling. One answering. Not to be rescued, but to remind the world of a debt paid in love and collected in courage. Some endings do not stop. They change kingdoms. And you, yes, you with the screen light on your face and the heart that has survived things it does not mention, what would you risk? Would you wager your comfort, your name, even the blessing of your gods for a love that refuses to obey maps? Tell me. Leave your echo below and pass this story to the one who still believes that love, when it has decided, is stronger than destiny.